Hey listeners, this episode is brought to you by EF World Journeys. Today's travelers want more from their vacation. That's why more people are turning to travel professionals to help them explore the world with confidence. For nearly 35 years, EF World Journeys has been the go-to guided experiential travel company for leisure travelers who want to learn more about people, places, and cultures around the world. Its brands EF Ultimate Break, EF Go Ahead Tours, and EF Adventures serve everyone from Gen Z to baby boomers and help tens of thousands of US and Canadian travelers every year explore 400 bucket list destinations. EF World Journeys is one of North America's biggest guided group tour companies, and its expert planned immersive itineraries focus on the big moments and little things that make travel and meeting new people so rewarding. It's experiential travel that goes deeper, where every journey builds a connection, inspires wellness, and fuels a lifelong love of learning. EF World Journeys, guided by experts, driven by curiosity. To learn more, go to efworldjourneys.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm here with Seth Borko, who is back from his honeymoon. Finally, Seth, how you doing?
Yeah. I mean, never better, right? I mean, nothing like the first week of work after your honeymoon to be, a real great week, but it was good. Still dreaming of the islands. I was in Tahiti for our listeners.
Oh my goodness. How long is that flight? And how many flights did it take you to get there from New York?
Well, I guess it depends on your perspective. I think for our listeners, it will be a surprisingly easy flight. You have to connect on the West Coast, but we flew to LA, and from LA, it's like 8 hours. So, 5 hours, 8 hours, it's not actually it was kind of easy. I was like, I got here faster than I thought I would. So,
all right.
Go ahead and check out Tahiti,
Yeah, I was going to say. All right. So, putting honeymoons and diving and the islands behind. Today, we have Jennifer Trock on our podcast. On the pod, we are going to talk about all things aviation and law. Jennifer is a partner at Morgan Lewis, based in DC, where she is an aviation lawyer. And just so you kind of can get the caliber of the guest we have on today, Jennifer has won Aviation Lawyer of the Year several times in a row now. Now, Seth, both you and I have been to a few very oddly specific travel awards shows. We both have. So maybe at the end, let's remember to ask Jennifer what that one was like. But, I digress. This is all to say we have one of the top aviation attorneys in the world on the pod today. So we're going to talk about the shutdown, any major updates in aviation legislation, including the ATC, air traffic control, those very important guys and girls up there in the tall towers, reform, airline antitrust, flying taxis. I mean, we're going to get into it all. So Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am super, super excited to be here. I would love to hear all about your flight, Seth, but I know we have other things to chat about. I have a passion for aviation. I didn't intend to be an aviation lawyer when I was a kid growing up, but it just happened to be my very first job. And, I thought that I might be an environmental lawyer and ended up working for the city of Chicago and working in their aviation group. And when they told me that, I said, I would love to, but why does the city of Chicago have an aviation group? And then I quickly learned why? Because they own and operate O'Hare. Midway, and at the time, Meigs Field. That probably dates me a little bit more than I would like, but that was my first real job in the legal profession. I fell in love with aviation and airports and all things transportation related from there. And then I moved to DC a few years after that, and I've been here ever since. And I really love it. Yeah, okay. No.
I need to ask you the hard-hitting question, which is, you said you fell in love with aviation law, but did you fall in love with O'Hare Airport? This is a serious question.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, I don't know how to otherwise.
One of the few.
I do, because I love, of course, I was doing a lot of the regulatory and contract work for the city, which included everything from use agreements and the O'Hare modernization program, kind of the infant stages of that, to be part of the planning of it. As a passenger, it can be a little bit challenging depending upon the time of year and the construction schedule. But yes, it is still, I think, one of my favorite airports. I do have a list of my favorite airports, and it is pretty high up there.
We'll have to ask about that. Can I put my co-host on blast for a little bit? Because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but my wonderful co-host, Sarah Kopit, is also a former attorney, and she has made her way from the legal world into the aviation world as well. So I don't know if you knew that, Jennifer, but there's
I
some
did not. I'd
connections
love
there.
to hear all about that. How did that
Yeah,
happen?
no, I practiced for 5 long years. That was long enough for me. So, 5 years, 25 years ago. So there you go. But yeah, you said you're in DC now, Jennifer, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So let's talk. What on earth is it like in DC right now? I mean, in order to do all these fun things with aviation, you need money, and government's not paying its bills right now. So first of all, just generally, what's the mood like in DC? And then more specifically, really, what does it mean for the aviation industry? Like, what are you hearing from folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it has been a roller coaster. It's been a roller coaster for the last, several months. There has been news every day, and obviously there's been a lot of significant aviation news this year, starting with a very tragic accident in this winter. And since then it's been just nonstop. And so I think we're very excited as an industry about the provisions for reform in the air traffic control world, the budget that's been associated with that, and the interest that has really been generated from that, and really kind of transforming that. And so there's a lot of, I think, cautious optimism. Obviously, we're in the middle of a government shutdown right now, and so that's creating a little bit of uncertainty. But in the core functions of DOT and FAA, there's still business as usual. So that's very good. But I think we're kind of anxious to get going with some of these really exciting initiatives around air traffic control and electric aircraft, both of which are kind of ripe for next steps. And we're all kind of really excited about that.
But fair to say they're on pause until the government reopens, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Yeah, yes and no, right? I mean, like some programs within, FAA and DOT are moving forward, but for the most part, kind of significant things are on pause.
So just for our listeners out there who may be curious, like, is it still safe to fly? And how long do you think if you had to guess, if you had to pull out the crystal ball, how long do you think it'll go on for this time?
I have no crystal ball. I really don't know. I think my guess is as good as anyone, and I hesitate to even take a stab for fear of being woefully wrong. But I think, yes. I mean, I think that the government, the FAA, the dedicated air traffic controllers, pilots, and the entire system is safety focused. And while there might be some delays and kind of operational issues, I personally, I mean, I flew last week, I flew the week before, I'm flying next week and the week after. I have absolutely no underlying concerns about the safety. Now, did my flight to Newark from DCA take a little longer than usual last week? Yes. And was it a little annoying to kind of have to sit on the ramp and wait for ATC clearance due to, lack of staffing? Yes. But did I have any concerns that we weren't going to get there safely? No.
As a frequent Newark flyer, we've been dealing with that since before the government shut down, though.
Right.
So
well, I know. There's that too. It was just like the added. I mean, it's hard to say whether that was really shutdown related or not. But yes, it was. At least our pilots suggested that it might have had something to do with that. So
the ATC, the air traffic control system, and I want to talk about this and something well. And we're by the way, I like to always level set for our audience. We're saying DOT, FAA. FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration. It's a department. It's a subsection of the Department of Transportation, and it oversees all of the air traffic control across the country. That's a correct statement, right?
That's right. And I think so you have the Department of Transportation, which kind of broadly covers all modes of transportation. And then you have the FAA, which is an independent agency focused on safety under DOT. And so when there is a little bit of a distinction in the roles of DOT versus FAA, but for this call, it is not worth getting into those details or for fear of boring your listeners. But I think of FAA, when I think of FAA, I think of things safety related and efficiency related.
And the air traffic controllers, the guys who actually talk to the pilots, are government employees who work for the FAA, right? Yeah. And so Congress just passed, I didn't do it. No one on this call passed it. Congress passed this big, beautiful bill is what Donald Trump has been calling it. And I think there's some debate over just how beautiful it is, but there's certainly no debate over how big it is. It's a huge piece of legislation. There's a lot in there, at least for the aviation related components. Are you one of the few people who's read this thing, Jennifer?
I don't know how many people have read it, and I can't say that I've read the entire thing, but I have certainly read the aviation-related provisions.
And so what's in it? What's in there for aviation?
I think the biggest thing in there for aviation is air traffic control reform and the allocation of $12.5 billion. Now, I will say, and that covers everything from replacing infrastructure and telecom and wireless systems to the individual like navigational aids at airports and kind of everything in between. I will say that the $12.5 billion, while it is a historic amount, is insufficient to complete all of the reforms that are being contemplated. I think the FAA calls it a quote unquote down payment on the changes that are needed. And the estimates are really more on the order of 30 plus billion all in. So it's a great start. It'll be up to future appropriations bills and others to ensure that, that the momentum continues, and more importantly, that the funding continues, because I think there's no question that the industry is very, very supportive.
So when we hear ATC reform, does that, in more layman's terms, does that really mean ATC modernization? Like, is that really what's going on, where the money is going?
Yeah, I mean, modernization in a big way, right? I mean, it's, the plans are to build a brand new state-of-the-art air traffic control system. And that includes everything from, there are certain antiquated telecommunications equipment that need to be upgraded with fiber, wireless, satellite technologies. I think something like over 4,600 sites around the country need to be upgraded just on the telecom side, right? So there's some things that need to be upgraded, some things that need to be kind of replaced, and then some things that need to be modernized, and almost everything that needs to be fully integrated, right? There's basically three main systems that make up air traffic control. And, even having kind of an integrated automation system for those would be a huge upgrade. So there's, that kind of phrase of modernization is, can kind of go a lot of different ways, but I think the administration is thinking big and kind of really thinking of a comprehensive overhaul and modernization of the entire system.
So is this the same thing as the conversation around ATC staffing, or is the staff levels for ATC a different conversation from the infrastructure for ATC?
I think it's a slightly different conversation, right? There's obviously the staffing issue, which has been, in the news a lot lately. Even to be trained as an air traffic controller, it's a very stressful, highly precise job, right? It takes years and years of dedicated training. But what the big, beautiful bill, as it's called, has really focused on has been the core infrastructure needs. I mean, there's an article, I think it's from like 1996 in the New York Times, maybe it's 1998, that talks about these same issues around the systems and the need for systems upgrades. So this is not the infrastructure side and the system side has been an issue for a very long time. And I think this is really such an important step in kind of really taking lasting action to hopefully reform it.
How long will this take? I know sometimes Congress likes to appropriate $100 billion, but they do it over 100 years to make the number bigger, and they add up each annual year. And it turns out it's not that much money in any given year. Is this $12.5 billion to be spent as soon as the government reopens, or is it over time? And how much time will it take to, I'm told that, I have a follow-up question, but I'll start there.
No, I mean, that's a great question. And I'm not sure, I know what, I'll talk about in a minute what DOT and Secretary Duffy have announced as the goal, which is to have, kind of a very significant part of the first phase of this done within 3.5 years. And that's very ambitious. Hopefully it will happen, but I don't, whether or not 3.5 years is really enough time, I think will remain to be seen. Earlier this year, or actually not just a couple of months ago, the Secretary announced a request for solutions where they went out to the market to look for what they call a prime integrator of its brand new air traffic control system, which is being an acronym for that is BATCS. I haven't heard anybody or BNATCS. I haven't heard anybody pronounce it yet, but that's the ask, right? And the submissions were due in September. There were 2 companies that put their name in the hat to be the prime integrator. The prime integrator is the entity that will kind of oversee this process, which they've broken down now into 2 phases. The first really focusing on the acquisition of new equipment and refreshing technology like, radar and software technology and the telecom equipment we were talking about. And then there's a second phase of it, which is a little bit outside of the scope of this first request for solutions to actually modernize, integrate, and transform the services. So that first phase, they're really targeting at having done within the next few years, which is, again, would be tremendous for the industry, but it's a very, very tall order.
And I want to move on to the next topic, which is, airports and stuff. But just to wrap it up for our listeners and kind of give the so what. It's a lot of prime integrators and government contractor talks and acronyms and bills and stuff. But a lot of our listeners are not necessarily aviation nerds. We're a full travel podcast. If you run a hotel or a tour company or a destination or an airline, what's the takeaway for those listeners? Like, what does this mean for them in terms of ATC reform and what the beautiful bill has allocated towards the aviation infrastructure?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it means enhanced safety, enhanced efficiency, fewer delays, shorter flight times, because you can now plan for air traffic patterns that are fully integrated with all of the systems, so that you don't have to maybe have as much time circling an airport or allow for enough time for other arrivals and departures. So it's a lot more efficiency, reduced environmental impacts, and generally a more frictionless experience for the traveling public. I think all of those things will be significant benefits for, I might think back to my flight last week to Newark, right? I mean, it's just all of those things, just having a more consistent air traffic system.
For other, folks who work in the travel industry, it means their travelers are going to get to their destinations in a better mood.
That's right.
Like, it's just going to be easier.
With more certainty. Yeah. I mean, you think about traveling through in the summer, with the thunderstorms and even better kind of weather management systems that are fully integrated with the air traffic systems, like all of those things kind of fit together. And I think, talk about some of the airport stuff and some of the electric aircraft stuff that's coming on board. All of those things require technology kind of talking to each other and making sure that we're taking advantage of all of this wonderful data and technology developments to create a more seamless experience, so the systems really are talking to each other.
So let's talk about airports. I am flying this evening. I'm going to LaGuardia Airport, which for the first 20 years that I lived in New York City was, how to describe LaGuardia? I don't know back then. And now it's like it's one of my favorite airports. It's just it's like the crown jewel of the
new
Northeast.
terminal. The new terminal is incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible.
They have a Singapore Changi style waterfall in LaGuardia.
I know.
It's crazy.
It rose like a phoenix during the pandemic. So, are we doing that with all the airports in the United States? Like, is that what's going on? Is that what's going to happen?
I mean, wouldn't that be nice? I think the Port Authority has done a lot. So the Port Authority owns and operates several of the New York airports, including JFK and LaGuardia for our listeners' benefits, and Newark. And they really, several years ago, I think maybe 10 years ago, they just announced a program where they were seeking kind of public-private partnership investment to help redo and modernize some of their terminals. And I think the terminal at LaGuardia is a great example of that. And then you've got projects at JFK Terminal 1, which has about, a whopping $15 billion in private investment. The overall project is $20 billion. It's not only the single largest public-private partnership at a U.S. airport, but it's the largest one in history, the largest P3 project in U.S. history. Now, with that said, I mean, the other thing though, which I think is one of the historic impediments to private investment in airports, is that because of the way that airports are funded and regulated by the FAA, so most airports receive a sizable amount of federal grants. And with those federal grants come certain restrictions on use of revenue generated at the airport. And without getting too into the weeds of the legal basis for that, what that essentially means is that if you want to sell or do a long-term lease with your airport, all of your proceeds, absent an exemption, have to go back to the airport. And so there's a strong disincentive for airports to fully privatize an airport. And there is a FAA program for public-private investment that to date, I mean, only a handful of airports have gone through that process, and even a smaller number have been successful. One that was successful is the privatization of the San Juan Airport in Puerto Rico. I was involved with that. I represented the successful bidder, but that was probably the first time that an airport has been fully privatized because of some of these impediments. And so what we've seen when those types of investments haven't worked out is this kind of quasi-privatization where a terminal might be privatized. And that's what we're really seeing in New York. But I'm hopeful that that does become, those waterfalls do become more prevalent, and not just for the aesthetics, but also because it does signal a lot more private investment. I will say I read one other stat from Airports Council International, which is the large trade association of U.S. airports. You know them, I'm sure you do, and I'm sure your listeners do as well. About 1% of airline passengers in the U.S. use a airport with a significant private sector investment. It shows you how little there is in the U.S., but 75% of passengers in Europe do. And so this is one area that is ripe for more private investment, but needs to be done thoughtfully and with demonstrated success records to kind of generate the interest, the momentum, and the private investment.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the European comparison because I actually had it in my notes for this conversation. It seems so backwards. The majority of airports in Europe are privatized. Everything in Europe is public, is government, except for the airports. And somehow the United States, the home of privatization, capitalism, free markets, all of our airports are government run. I don't know if this is too broad a question for one person to answer, but why is that? Do you know why that? What was the legislative intent that caused that to happen?
And I can tell you the
in the U.S., not Europe.
In the U.S.,
no,
I can tell you why. I mean, it's because I think this was in the early 90s. There were concerns about airports taking money from the federal government. So you get your $30 million to build a new runway, and then collect your fees from the airlines landing there, and you take the money from the airport and go build a public library in the city. So you take, most airports in the US are owned and operated by local cities or airport authorities. And so Congress got concerned with that and said, if we're going to be giving airports lots of money, we want to make sure that they're using it for airport purposes, right? And so that's kind of the genesis of it. And then what that means in practice is if I'm the owner and operator of a public airport that's received money from the federal government and I want to sell the airport, the proceeds from that sale or privatize it have to go back to the airport. So why would I ever sell it? I can't take the money and go take a trip to Tahiti, right? I have to use it for the airport. And so that's why. And so around, I think around the same time, the FAA said, well, we're going to, the Congress authorized a pilot program to privatize airports, which requires a private operator to go through a number of regulatory hurdles and get airline approval and all of the things to get an exemption that would allow an airport to sell its assets or enter into a long-term lease. But again, that has not been historically that successful. You have one or two examples in the US of that happening. The first and the only commercial one to date has been San Juan, Puerto Rico. But other airports like Midway and St. Louis and others have tried, but ultimately failed. Sometimes that's due to political reasons. Sometimes it's money, investment. It's a very difficult process.
So what's the deal with these terminals? Because you alluded to that. Because are the private investors capitalists, for lack of a better word, or are they airlines? Because I know a lot of these terminals, they get JetBlue or Delta or whoever to chip in, and they say, well, it's your passengers coming through, JFK Terminal 5, where I fly a lot. I fly JetBlue a lot. All JetBlue customers. They have a terrible experience. So the airline, I won't call it extortionate, but goes to JetBlue and says, well, would you like a better experience for your passengers? Maybe you should give us some money. Is that the kind of private investment we're talking about? Are we talking about a commercial operator like they have in Europe, where there's actually public companies that run these things? Is it a private equity or a hedge fund infrastructure investor?
It's a lot of private equity, and it's a lot of private investors and operators who have experience running airport terminals. And when we're talking about it, we're usually talking about kind of, the passenger experience. So everything from, the design and the build and the operation and oversight of the terminal itself. So when you go through security, you enter the terminal, you've got lounges, and you've got Wi-Fi, and you've got, fancy stores and gate areas. And that's the opportunity for private investment, right? They can design, build, operate, run, and monetize the facilities at the airport for the passengers, whether they be JetBlue passengers or the other carriers at that airport.
Do you think we'll see, what's your hope for, we'll see more of this? Midway will get privatized, St. Louis will get privatized? Is that going to happen? Or those are dead in the water? What's next for privatization?
I think I don't see a lot of movement on the full privatization, so full privatization of an airport. But I do see a lot of hope and optimism and interest. I think people are really closely watching the New York model to look for investment opportunities at other airports. It does take a willing airport to kind of partner with a private investor, but if they are willing to do it, there's a lot of upside and a lot of opportunity.
So speaking of JetBlue, Skift recently held a transatlantic summit where we talked about all things, between the US and Europe. And I talked to Marty St. George on stage, the president of JetBlue, and he was complaining about airline consolidation. And he said, the industry is too consolidated. It makes it really hard for the little guys to compete, and with, competition, not being able to bring down prices and all of that. So as an airline antitrust attorney, what do you think? Do you need more or less vigorous antitrust in the US airline market in order to kind of have this robust system for consumers?
Yeah, I'm not really sure I'm going to want to answer that. I feel like it's too fraught. I'm sorry. Okay.
Seth, why don't you lead us into the eVTOLs?
Sure. Well, one of the things you just referenced the New York model of airport privatization. That means specifically, just for the reader's benefit, that means privatized in specific terminals, right?
Yeah, or assets at an airport, right? So yeah, but typically a specific terminal. And there's another, there's an example in Austin, for example, they have a kind of field, an off-site, off the main terminal that's for their low-cost carriers, which is a great other example of it at a smaller airport.
Okay, so we've covered so far, we've covered a lot. We've covered the shutdown. We've covered ATC reform, the future of air traffic control. We've covered the airports, the future of airports. There's another piece of the future of, let's call it aviation. And I think the jargon is eVTOL, really rolls off the tongue. That's electric vertical takeoff and landing, which is the type of aircraft that is electric and takes off and lands vertically. I think the real
it's a
word
flying
for this
car, Seth.
flying car, flying taxi. That's what they really are. There's all these startups. Uber's been playing around with it. There's a company called Joby, which is a publicly traded company. We're hearing all these things. I'm seeing all these mock-ups of these eVTOLs and these fancy airline liveries. I've yet to fly in one. I don't actually know if they're not even officially commercially flying yet. I know this is something you're really interested in, Jennifer. I guess my question is what's the deal with flying taxis? What's the deal with flying cars? Is sort of my question. To start, we'll get into more of it.
I know.
Have you ever been in one first?
I absolutely cannot. I've only been in a simulator because as Seth mentioned, we can't fly around in them just yet. But they fall under this broad term called advanced air mobility. So sometimes you hear that. Sometimes you hear eVTOL, the electric vertical takeoff and landing terminology. Sometimes you might hear urban air mobility, and there's lots of different kind of terms, but it all kind of refers to the next generation of transportation, right? The real future of mobility. And I don't know, I'm personally really excited because it's the first time that we've had a new aircraft type in our lifetime, probably in the last 100 years, right? So you had helicopters, you've had planes, and this is kind of almost like a hybrid, right? Where you take off and then you have electrically powered rotors. One of the players, Archer Aviation, I think they have like
Yeah, I should have mentioned Archer.
12 rotors, and that's it. And it's absolutely incredible. They're all electrically powered. And the industry has really evolved. We've been talking about, we in the aviation industry and the aviation nerds or geeks, as we sometimes say, we've been talking about these for like the last 15 years. And there has been so much investment. I think I read like in 2021, and there was like $6 billion worth of investment in this sector in the first 6 months of that year. And so people have been talking about this for a long time. So it's new in the sense that it's finally getting some real traction and likely to become operational sooner rather than later, but it has been in the works for a really long time. And so where are we today? Anytime we've had like a new technology where you've got these amazing tech startups and there's incredible interest in the sector, but no regulatory framework, right? Because think about it, we haven't had this kind of a flying car or flying air taxi ever. And for the listeners, like these are kind of aircraft that they vary in size, but they're not huge, right? You know, a few people, 4 to 10 people on them, maybe. They take off like a helicopter, they fly like a plane, they're very easy to maneuver. The ones in development are piloted, but eventually, you know, kind of the industry is looking towards automation. It's really transformative, but there were no standards, right? There's, how do you make these safe? How do you ensure that people are going to be comfortable flying in them? We didn't have any infrastructure for them. They're like flying Teslas. You have to plug them in somewhere. And then you have all of the airspace things, right? Because they're taking up space in a different part of the airspace that's not part of our air traffic control system we were just talking about. So there's all kinds of things that have to come together. But I think we're getting really close.
When you were in the simulator, did it feel very different than being in a helicopter?
Well, I'm not very good at flying simulators.
Oh, you were flying it?
Oh,
I thought you
fly this.
No,
I mean, get in one, and then you get to fly it, and it was very easy, but I was still required some assistance.
Wait, I feel like we have to ask this as a side. Are you a pilot, Jennifer? Do you know how to fly?
No, I've done a little bit of ground school, and I've done I've been in
just a little bit of ground school.
No,
Yeah.
like read a
touch of ground school.
Right, if I had to. I mean, I don't know. I could fly. No, probably not. But over the years, I have been in a few simulators here and there, and they're always kind of I don't know. I kind of geek out on it. So it was fun. But it is kind of like being in a helicopter, but it's also like being in a plane. I mean, it really is kind of a hybrid of two.
On this helicopter point, though, I know you've mentioned the Av Geek community. Yeah. We love them. They can be a little ornery sometimes. And I think that there are corners of the Av Geek community that would just write these things off as they're just helicopters by another name. How is an eVTOL different from a helicopter, and why does it need to be regulated? Why don't we just use helicopter regulations for eVTOL regulations, I guess is the question.
I think lots of reasons. One, it's all electric, right? All of our regulations are around
fossil fuels.
Powered or fuel-powered engines. And it doesn't operate in the same way. It has a very different operational profile because in some of the models, right, your rotors kind of go vertically. You can see my hands. I'm making a little spinny thing with my finger. And then they rotate and they go forward, right? So it is really a different way of flying. And the challenge is that the existing standards for rotorcraft and neither the existing standards for rotorcraft nor the existing standards for helicopters were sufficient to capture the new technology. It was kind of like with drones when they first came, with small drones, right? Where people were, I mean, maybe like 10 years ago now or more than that, people are like, oh, I've got these little, 50-pound drones and I want to go fly them and, deliver packages and stuff. Well, they're aircraft because they fly, but the FAA, nobody had regulations for them. And so anytime there's new technology, you always have this tension between the new technology outpacing the regulatory framework. And so a lot of the work that's been done over the last 10 years has really been to develop that framework. And then each country has its own framework, right? So it's a very complicated environment to get to the aircraft to the point where it's safe to operate. And then you have to figure out how to integrate it and how to actually operate it. And sorry, I could talk about this forever. So let me just say one more thing, and then I'm going to stop for more questions because I know you will have more questions. But the vision is really kind of transformative, right? Joby and Archer, which are two of the larger players in the US market, have both announced major partnerships with US airlines, United and Delta and others, to provide kind of seamless connectivity. So you could take a helicopter from Manhattan to JFK, a helicopter, an eVTOL from JFK to Manhattan or to Long Island, right? Wherever you happen to be. And it will transform the way that we think about air transportation. It's a vision.
The future of the Hamptons, future of the Hamptons commute.
Hopefully other applications.
I'm just curious, how far off the ground do they fly? Like helicopters have to go up a certain amount, or at least they usually do. Like when we talk about flying cars, like, are we really kind of talking about flying cars? Like they may be hovering around like, 3 stories up.
I think a little higher than what you're thinking. I'm probably more like in the 500, more like a helicopter.
Okay.
In that kind of flight path. And then part of it is, that they're much more environmentally friendly. They're quieter, but they're not silent, right? And so kind of all of the things that you have with any kind of aircraft operation around noise mitigation, environmental considerations, and then just, again, the air traffic management aspects of it. I think one of the things we're really looking at in the industry is the infrastructure associated. So there are vertiports being developed around the world, and that will be kind of local hubs where you can go and charge, where an electric aircraft can get charged, where you can go and get on it. But even the zoning requirements in different states and, kind of the FAA oversight and all of those things need to be worked out to really bring this to scale. But it's exciting.
Do you think it's going to be one of those things, kind of like with the Waymos and the self-driving cars, where, all of a sudden, all of a sudden they just appear, and it's just like, well, oh my God, look at this. Look at this. Yeah. Like, do you think it'll kind of, I feel like it like the Waymos kind of, it's like you've either been in one or you haven't. Everybody who's been in one is like, yes, I see the future. And some people are like, what is a Waymo? And so do you feel like, just from a cultural or sociological standpoint, like one day we're just going to have, like, they're just going to start showing up, and they're going to be like in Phoenix. Phoenix is going to be the test case, or whatever smaller city wants to step out and be the one. And that's how it's going to go.
It's going to be really, I don't know. Like, I got stuck behind a Waymo in my real car the other day, and I was just so annoyed because
Where were you?
I was in DC. I didn't know it was a Waymo or like a different one, but it like obeyed every single stop sign in a way that was just like, slowing us down. So I digress. It's probably not the best. But yes, I think that's right. I think you're going to hear more and more about them, but this is I think a step beyond a Waymo, right? Like, because if you're in an urban environment, you're not going that fast, like there's lots of, it's probably easier for the average person to say like, yeah, I'll get in a Waymo, I'll try it out. I don't know what this is. But when you're talking about getting in something that flies several hundred feet above the ground in an urban environment with new technology, you have a pilot, so that should give people some comfort. But there is a big component of this is just kind of the human factor side of it, and making sure that people are A, comfortable with the technology, and B, that they use it, right? And it's interesting that you mentioned kind of like the smaller city startups, because the Trump administration announced so the administration is like very focused on being the leader in this technology. And so they've announced that Archer is going to be the air taxi provider for the 2028 Olympics in LA. And they have announced try this for a tongue twister. It's the Electric Vertical Takeoff and Landing Integration Pilot Program, the EIPP, where, yes, EIPP, or I don't know if we can make up a new acronym for it, but anyway, so EIPP, and it's it was just a couple of months ago that they announced it. And what it will do is it will enable pilot programs to be tested to test some of these models. Now that can be, it's not just flying people around, it might be flying cargo around, or it might be kind of other applications like medical applications, but it's really designed. So what they'll do is they'll select 5 pilot programs, and the pilot programs are partnerships between, it's another great example of kind of a public-private partnership, because it's a partnership between the eVTOL operator and local cities and counties that want to facilitate these kinds of test cases. And so the program will select 5 projects, and the idea is to demonstrate the public benefits, the safety, and kind of opportunities with these aircraft, as well as kind of gather information for the FAA and DOT on how to further enhance regulations and guidance and frameworks to bring these to market. And that is kind of one thing that we're watching really, really closely. There's a very aggressive timeline on that. We have not seen any announcements on it since the shutdown, but we expect to see some soon. And I think it'll be a really exciting test case for some of these applications, just to see how willing people are to actually engage.
And to make sure I understand that right, the test cases will involve effectively, maybe not passenger flights, but test commercial flights, whether it's cargo or people, of these flying taxis.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll be commercial. I mean, like, look, they've listed operations that they envision, right? So everything from cargo to logistics and emergency flights. They've encouraged, kind of looking at different degrees of automation. And we've talked about how these aircraft will eventually move towards, fully automated operations. So not only are you flying in a hybrid vehicle, but you're flying in one that's automatically piloted. And so there aren't a lot of operational constraints on what the department will consider with these programs, but I think we'll see a lot of innovation across the board.
So, just to ask maybe an unfair question, but like 2028, the Olympics are going to have an official eVTOL sponsor. Do you think we'll hit that goal in the year 2028? Will there be at least one person? Yeah, will there be one person flying in an eVTOL in LA in 2028?
Yeah, I don't see a reason that, with this administration's focus on it, the industry's excitement about it, and the infrastructure that's been put in place, I have every expectation that will happen. I'm really excited. Maybe I'm a little bullish on it, but I am super excited. And again, it's one of those things where it's like you said, it's like all of a sudden you see Waymos everywhere. This has been for those that know cars, you knew that Waymo has been in development for 15 years. And for those that know eVTOL, we also know, this is not the first time. It's the first time that a lot of people have heard about it, but we've been thinking about it for a long time. And so I do think in that sense, it is going to be kind of like a flash, okay, here we are. And then the challenge is getting people comfortable with getting in them.
I don't know. It only took one Waymo for me. It took one.
Were you sold, or were you never again?
Oh, I was absolutely sold. I was like, oh, I understand now how the entire transportation grid is going to operate in 20 years' time. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and you can envision it. You can envision jumping in your Waymo, taking you to a vertiport, getting in an electric aircraft, going to the airport, and then
the airport is privatized. The airport terminal is privatized.
And there's a beautiful fountain.
Flying through a beautifully integrated ATC system, landing, there is so much connectivity, and the pace of, I think the biggest challenge is going to be making sure that the regulatory framework keeps up with the technology, but in the aviation sector, particularly ensuring safety is paramount, right? And safety is always number one when we talk about it. And we talked about that at the very beginning. Yes, safety is always the most important thing. And particularly when you're introducing this new technology, because it does take a lot for someone to get comfortable in a Waymo. And it does take a lot for someone to get comfortable in this aircraft that they've never flown on. And making sure that it's safe, I think, is going to be the most important thing. But it's exciting.
It is exciting. And Seth, I think there's no better place to leave it than right there.
It's a great vision for the future. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer. I really enjoyed this conversation.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Hey listeners, this episode is brought to you by EF World Journeys. Today's travelers want more from their vacation. That's why more people are turning to travel professionals to help them explore the world with confidence. For nearly 35 years, EF World Journeys has been the go-to guided experiential travel company for leisure travelers who want to learn more about people, places, and cultures around the world. Its brands EF Ultimate Break, EF Go Ahead Tours, and EF Adventures serve everyone from Gen Z to baby boomers and help tens of thousands of US and Canadian travelers every year explore 400 bucket list destinations. EF World Journeys is one of North America's biggest guided group tour companies, and its expert planned immersive itineraries focus on the big moments and little things that make travel and meeting new people so rewarding. It's experiential travel that goes deeper, where every journey builds a connection, inspires wellness, and fuels a lifelong love of learning. EF World Journeys, guided by experts, driven by curiosity. To learn more, go to efworldjourneys.com.